I'll say a couple alibis, as we like to say in my old business before we start. One is this is a very new field for me, the
Mhm.
disability access and demographic. So it was very eye-opening. I was hoping to get some input from Miss Muller, but I never did connect with her. So
Okay.
what I decided to do was, I had all this research that I did. I decided to put it together
Yeah.
and present it to the group. And then I'd still like to follow up with her so that she can maybe focus our attention. And then it also dawned on me that the ADA compliance officer for the State Board of Elections would be a great person to talk to as well. I've had some
Agreed.
very informal conversations with people who have worked in polling places about what goes on and what doesn't go on. But it's hard for me to know what are state policies and what are not with regards to access and techniques and approaches. So while everybody's eyes were rolling in their head, this is super dense. I collected. Hey, Wiley, you're gonna have to take her out. Just grab her by the collar, okay? You want to play with you? Super dense, a lot of information here. But I think the couple takeaways, I wanted to have sort of a one-stop shop for data, and then a place to build from if we did propose recommendations. I think maybe the high level for the left side of this chart is that this is a legally protected group of voters, and a very large group of voters across the country. And as far as I can tell, North Carolina's population tracks in kind. So we're talking about probably about 1 million voters here in the state. I think the other takeaway with this data is that turnout is improving for voters with disabilities, but they are still having a very different kind of experience at the polling place than voters without disabilities. They're also having a different kind of experience with early and mail-in voting than voters who do not have a disability. And finally, I think the big takeaway after having read as much as I did was that there are definitely opportunities to expand access and to give better access to those voters who are participating despite the disabilities that they have. Before I maybe speak to a couple of these bullets specifically, I think Rachel's invitation, I participated or listened in on the elections group presentation last month, and they talked about best practices. They also gave some resources for me to kind of go find some of the information that I've used here to describe the landscape for voters with disabilities. Thank you. So a lot of the really pertinent data came from a Rutgers ongoing study that maybe some of you are familiar with, that they did in conjunction or do in conjunction with the Elections Assistance Commission. And it's a longitudinal set of data that I was able to see, even as a layperson, kind of the trend line about the experience that voters with disabilities have. And then I also used that Meredith poll that Martha shared with us just recently, and there were, as she alluded to, some questions and some feedback in there that were specific to North Carolina voters with disabilities. So I'll point out just a couple things real quickly, and then maybe answer questions or hear your reflections. But on the left side, those lettered data points that are highlighted, those are all specific to North Carolina voters' experiences. And several of those are from that Meredith poll, but some of that data is also from the Rutgers data pool and also a study that the University of Maryland just recently published. I think the biggest takeaway with that highlighted data is that amongst our potentially million registered voters who have some disability, a very high percentage reported difficulty or challenges at the polling place. And then I think maybe the most interesting part, that opens itself for improvement is that much of that difficulty could have been alleviated with more helpful poll workers who understood the laws, understood the equipment, and understood the accessibility features better than they currently did. I think the other thing of note here is that North Carolina's shift to the no excuse mail-in voting followed a national trend line, and that resulted in a great increase in turnout of disabled voters, an increase of 6.9, almost 7%. And then the other thing of note that's an extension on that is that states who moved from, in 2022, states that moved from a no excuse mail-in voting system to an all vote by mail voting system saw a further increase in the turnout of disabled voters. I think I'll pause there to try to answer questions, or so that you all can comment before we move to the right side of the chart. But that's what I've got in terms of landscape.
Ted, on point N, that stood out to me as an alarming statistic. 77% reported did not have the necessary. So in terms of money, because that's going to be a part of a lot of what we're talking about.
Sure.
There's a big difference in money required versus putting out more resources versus adding personnel.
Yeah.
Now, one thing you said that I latched on to, it didn't sound like the problem was necessarily additional personnel, but just better training the personnel there. Is that?
Yeah. Well said, Myron. And that was kind of the bumper sticker from the elections group conversation.
Okay.
Is that they had some best practice suggestions, but having staff on hand, either one designated person per shift or at the polling site, who was the point person for concerns over accessibility, and or better yet, having a robust training program to make sure that amongst the many other things that a poll worker has to be concerned about, that they are also knowledgeable about disability access. And then maybe the easiest of all, it was kind of surprising to me how much time those presenters who represented both local and national elections stakeholders across the country, how much time they spent talking about the benefit of kind and courteous poll workers, and that although kind of obvious point, goes a long way, especially amongst the disabled population who don't necessarily want to be treated differently. They just want to be treated with dignity and respect, right? Which is,
I mean, it's
something
you're
we've all
right.
been.
It's almost cliche. I mean, the rule holds. I mean, customer service matters.
Yes, sir. Yep, you got it, Myron.
And I had one just quick question. I hope it's a quick question. On point P, can you explain what that is, that when they say?
Yeah, that was a hard one for me to reflect, but it seems significant. So that 4% is kind of an expanded group who I guess the scenario would be that a voter comes in to a North Carolina voting place and already felt like they didn't have the resources that she or he needed to be able to cast a ballot. In their responses, the way that the responses were parsed out in the polls results, it cited both voters with disabilities who acknowledged they did not have all of the resources that they needed to cast a vote. So that subset was 33%. That's 0.0. And then in point P, a smaller group of voters with disabilities said specifically that they needed additional help because of their disability. That seems like it's splitting hairs a little bit, but I think what that reflected to me was that this is a group of voters who knows their rights and knows what they should have access to, but was not experiencing that necessarily at the polling
Okay.
place.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Looks like Martha has her
Martha,
hand
I'll
up.
try. I'll try.
Well, no, this is, let me just, this is lovely. I mean, shocking and awe, but I so appreciate your work. I am, I think this goes together though with the other committees. We're talking about poll workers, like there's not somebody with, that can help them. But, talking to Leslie Garvin, she was talking about how she just had two people helping her in, darned anyway, what county is she in? Guilford? Guilford. She only had two people helping her the day that she was voting. And I mean, maybe another big picture thing is not just, we want to be careful how we frame this, that, it's not something that the poll workers do. And we know that the election officials are working their tails off on this, but there, we've got to help them get more poll workers, which is what the election administration committee is going to say. And wow, do you think a person, I mean, I think having a poll worker who has a disability, sorry, maybe I'm going to the right side too quickly. That's
that's
really
great.
cool. That's really cool.
Yeah,
But how can we, I mean, maybe I'll throw that into my infrastructure committee and see what they say, that we were talking about it over poll workers over the life course.
mhm.
But anyway, I'm just throwing that out. It's a concern that we just don't even have enough poll workers. So you also said nearly, where did you get the 13%? Nearly 1 million registered voters have a physical, emotional, that's 3, but I can't read it.
That
Is
came
that a
from
Meredith
that
poll?
came from that Meredith poll, and
Okay, I missed
I'm
that.
glad
Okay.
I'm glad that you asked about it, Martha, because I really had a difficult. I did a little bit of math to make that happen. That 1 million number.
Okay.
So 13%, if I had taken more space to describe that, that was 13% of respondents to the Meredith poll. I know enough statistics to get me in trouble, but probably not enough to make statements like that.
So you're just making an inference to a larger population,
This is an
13% of
inference,
the voters.
and
Yeah.
I think actually the fact that I had so much difficulty coming up with a number is that is not really a demographic that we track to some extent because of how broad this group of people is.
Yeah.
And hearing some of the stories that were told during the elections group meeting, what qualifies as a disability is very broad. This is not something that people are carrying credentials for or a doctor's note for, and nor I didn't state this, but there is no requirement to substantiate what your disability is in order to have access to the accommodations at a polling place. So it's a very ambiguous number to put a specific data point to. However, nationally and in the state, it seems true that about 25%, 27% of the US voting age population has got a disability of some sort that would fall into that category. So that, Martha, my short answer to your question is that 13% is probably the low end, and that is drawn from that Meredith poll.
All right, Ted, you had wanted to present the other side now?
Sure. So the top right corner, problems identified by the Disability Rights Group of North Carolina. So I pulled this straight from their website. This was very concise, and it really did encapsulate what I came up in all of the discussions in the Rutgers research, as well as in the University of Maryland findings that were published in January. These three things, these three items or focus areas really do encapsulate what most of the problems are that lead to, some of these very large numbers in terms of how much difficulty voters have at the polling place. So again, it's not that we don't have the assistive technology. It's that it's not being showcased appropriately. It's that voters don't know that it is there for them to use, or that the poll workers are not able to assist appropriately to use the equipment. And then this again, general, and Martha, your point is well made. Not to continue to beat on the group of people who are doing so much hard work, but there is a persistent narrative in respondents to these polls about difficulty when they come to the poll and they ask for help, or they bring a support person to get help, that they are being turned away or limited by the poll workers. So just poll workers not understanding the legal landscape. And then curbside voting, both a success and now also, as we heard in the last meeting, a big challenge for elections officials.
On that list of recommendations, a lot of great ones there. I'm sorry, Jennifer had her hand up. Go ahead, Jennifer. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, thanks. I'm just wondering if poll workers actually turning voters away, did disability rights have any way of tracking the numbers that included?
Yeah, Jennifer, that's one of the questions that I was hoping Ms. Muller would be able to answer for us, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's got to be substantiated somewhere. I did not find that in the data on their website, but it sure seems that way, that it would be.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important because that's, people are worried about that with voter ID, and, having a disability is like even more
Yep.
important, to not turn people away.
Right. I mean, it's a protected class
Yeah.
under federal law. So,
Mhm.
my just comment was I really like the idea under the many good recommendations is the standardized job aids for poll workers. In other words, yes, something that we could, a kit, for lack of a better word, that kind of, it might include signage that explain,
Right.
that they could hang up somewhere, or some other tools that, we could standardize, put in the kit, and it will work from, Rowan to Cumberland. I can never think of the two far-flung counties. I can think of
Yeah.
far-flung cities, but not far-flung counties. Currituck to, y'all give me one on the eastern side of it, the western side.
Welcome.
There we go. But in any case, a standardized set of job aids, I think would be very good. And again, you get into affordability. Is there even money available for that? So
There are, I can speak a little bit to that, Myron. There are those resources that are already available through the Elections Assistance Commission, excuse me. And then also this Center for Civic Design was not a group that I was familiar with. They were participants in the elections group. I see Martha cheering. I was very, very impressed with what their organization does. I think, Martha, maybe you can correct me, but I think that their bumper sticker is making government function more easily accessible to the public, or something along those lines. And they have a lot of that content that they have already produced. And then they also do what would it be called? Site visits, or kind of consulting type work for groups that request it.
Okay, I'm just thinking of where I vote regularly, the elementary school or middle school, where me and my wife vote. And of course, I'm not looking for a sign for, if you're disabled. So that's the caveat, but I just can't recall seeing one at that precinct where I vote. That sort of lays it out. But again, I'm not looking for one. So it may have been there all the time. Martha.
Well, I'm going to have a question, but Nadine has her hand up, and she did before me. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So her Nadine, in defense of me, like, your little hand is a little bit lighter and it blends in with the background. But go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know. I feel like yellow would make me a Simpsons character.
The Simpsons.
But I guess I have more of a comment just to like reiterate all of Ted's work here is that um I guess in the political science literature there is like a sense that these disabled voters are considered as like second class voters, and that when we
Feel
make
it
it,
too.
yeah,
So
and this has broader effects on their like just even just being more involved in their community. Like if you were relegated to voting just by mail, well, it has like and this is like your whole life. Everything is like you can only do this and you have this alternative way. Well, it's not good enough for everyone, or it doesn't make them feel like their vote counts as much or their participation is as appreciated as other voters, right? And so I think like if you have poll workers who don't know how to handle someone and they'll just say, well, then you can do X instead, like go home and cast your ballot by mail or whatever. Um, it's even though they can technically vote, or if you cast a ballot by mail, like if they want to vote in person, like that's, you know, a privilege that just because you have some disability, you shouldn't be denied. And likewise, like as someone, I had like a major knee injury that made standing for a long time really difficult, but I wasn't characterized as disabled. So I read in a piece, I think the piece is Belt. I think the last name of the author is Belt, and it's 2016, but they said that disabled voters are like the canaries in the coal mine. They signal all of the problems that we have in our system. Like they're the ones who are going to be the most sensitive to all of the problems, right? So like a regular voter, maybe waiting in line for 20 minutes isn't a big deal, but then maybe that regular voter is going to have a torn ACL, and you know, I wouldn't be necessarily a like card carrying disabled person, but like it shows that voting is not as easy as people think. So but yeah, there's like this idea that the disabled population are like the ones who are going to feel all of the like cracks in the system, and they'll be more sensitive to all the problems. So that's like another reason that maybe the able bodied population would care how easy it is or accessible voting is for disabled people, because I don't know, able-bodied people could easily become disabled.
It's true. All right,
Yeah.
Martha, you still have something or
well, let me just
and
point
then
out
Tony. Mhm.
just quickly. So first, so not all counties have separate equipment, but they may have separate assistive aids. So in Mecklenburg County, we all use the accessible equipment. So we don't put in Meck County, yes, we don't put that person in the corner. But with
Yeah.
those places with OpScan ballots, you know, the fill in the oval ones, they do have the accessible equipment. And I guess I mean this if we can get Tara to comment on this would be great, but I'd be curious to know, you know, I guess I wonder where the worst problems are, if they really, I mean, does Met County really have, I mean, yeah, probably have the similar problems? Like where are the assistive aids easy to get? Like, I don't know, or do people carry their own headphones? I don't know. That's a question for Tara. So Tony, I'm done if you.
Okay, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I was Ted and Myron. Just a quick shout out to curbside voting. I think we talked about this last month when Sharon Main was on from Rowan County. That's a bestseller, and it seemed like expanding it would take care of a lot of the issues. Thank you.
Agree. That's just I observe here in Cumberland County. That seems to be, no matter where I voted, a pretty good system that's effective. Now it's helpful that at the precincts I've been in, it's not overflow. You know, there'd been smaller
Yeah.
precincts, but they have run really smoothly, and they seem to be really appreciated by voters.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right. Anything else, Ted?
No, I think I would just close with saying it would be prudent to talk with Tara, obviously, and get her much more professional experience with this
Okay.
before we winnow down the recommendations. And then I will see if I can reach out to somebody at the State Board of Elections who might be able to speak to what things are in place. You know, I heard the guests last time talk about job aids and that they were producing themselves. So I know that, or I would assume that there are some out there, but how they're shared amongst precincts and election commissioners, I just don't know how that works. So I'll try to work on
I
that.
think, I'm so sorry to interrupt. That
No,
was so
please.
rude, Ted, I'm sorry. But I got so excited because the Election Infrastructure Committee also last time was talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we had an easy to access library of materials for all of the election officials? I mean, you saw
Yeah.
the Election Assistance Commission, it's great. But there's got to be something that's just pure, full on North Carolina, where we could take
Absolutely.
all of that stuff that Shara gave us from Wake County, for example, and put it in. So if one of the smaller counties, they don't have time to write something up, they can just go on the website and grab it.
Yeah,
And
that seems like a very doable
exactly.
hurdle. And I think, from construction paper with crayon writing on it all the way through, highly produced signage, we have the gambit, I'm sure, here in the state, and there are some that are more effective than others. And so to give the different precincts the opportunity to choose those that have been vetted and proven that's a very low cost, high return.
Yep. Low hanging fruit there.
Yep. And the last one, we talked about this a little bit last time, but I was very impressed with the potential that a mock election has. Obviously there's a time horizon with that, but I heard two different elections commissioners talk about the benefit at their early polling sites. So early polling sites are going to see a higher density of voters with disabilities. And that was an opportunity to really go through a sea trial, if you will, to see if they had the right staffing, to see if they were able to answer the types of questions, to see if, they put the assistive technology in the proper spots in the room, just a place to work the kinks out, especially before large national elections.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, Nadine, you all good to go? All right. Carry it away.
Yep. Okay. Do you want to pull up my thing or should I?
You should be able to have the privilege to do it on your own.
Okay. Let me.
While she's doing that, so maybe just Ted should throw his stuff in the report. I put the Google Doc that we're started in the chat. And I guess, maybe we could whittle down if we need to, or if you feel like you're ready to. But it's there in the chat.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me just get these pulled up. All right. I'll share my screen.
Martha, will you say again? So that document, I'm trying to think about our timeline here. Should I wait until we've gotten Tara's input and the State Board of Elections 88 person's input to see if some of those recommendations are already being implemented to avoid kind of adding noise to the conversation, or do you want me to just put them in now?
Do you think you would want to, when do you think would you be able to get with them, or what are your thoughts, or do you want us to try and get with them? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll tell you what, Martha, I'll connect with you offline. I think I'm
Awesome.
happy to try to do that. I've had difficulty getting a hold of Miss Muller though, so if you would help me with that
So
piece.
maybe I should.
Sorry, Nadine, I'm out.
Oh, okay. So mine's not as detailed as Ted's, but I looked at limited English proficiency voters, and I think the last meeting with the guest speakers highlighted that I don't think North Carolina does very much for anyone who doesn't speak English. And I think it seemed like the poll, one of the poll workers noted that they did have in polling place materials at one point, but it's unclear when they went away or why, or what happened in general. But North Carolina, none of the counties are covered under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, which covers language minorities. So there's no real requirement that North Carolina counties produce like ballots in the polling places. So pretty much if you don't want to read all these things, pretty much your choices are to request a absentee ballot online in Spanish. And they do have materials on the state board website that you can, you know, they have directions, but it's just in Spanish. So that's about it. And limited English proficiency voters, this is just a category of people who essentially just don't speak English well enough. And the Voting Rights Act does cover a broad swath of language minorities, but we don't have those large enough populations. But there are counties, I believe like Los Angeles County offers voting materials in 13 different languages. But you know, that's pretty much this whole page. I just have the Voting Rights Act kind of summarized here. But it doesn't seem like North Carolina does very much, and they're not required to either. So it's
Nadine,
mhm.
can I ask a question that may expose both my naivety, both about the voting process and artificial intelligence? um, so as I understood it, you to say that someone has to request online voting materials in a different language, and the language that's available to them currently is Spanish.
Yes.
Okay, not other languages.
I didn't see any other languages.
Okay, so I was wondering if we look at potential recommendations. I mean, in the era of AI, here's the AI part. Can they not just easily convert these materials to any language they want to? So someone could come in and put in, you know, if their native country is you know, of course, Ukraine's, and it's the same set of countries are on the brain for obvious reasons. But if they're Ukrainian, can they go and put in? I mean, could it be possible, computer wise, AI wise, to just make it so they can easily do a different language? I can't figure out why we're so limited to just Spanish.
I so in my research, like a lot of this can be done in the voting machines. These can just be programmed. But I guess the problem is that they need to have this printed out. But I there
So they
are
have to. Gotcha. I'm
there
sorry.
are
I didn't mean to
other
cut you off. Go ahead. Go ahead.
county sorry, there are other counties. I have that listed towards the bottom here of all these different languages that
Okay.
counties have to provide a lot of indigenous populations. But you know, there's other counties that are able to produce ballots, and there's even some languages, I forget exactly which one, but some of the I believe in Alaska there might be some Native American
language.
languages that are not even written languages. So there are like the technology exists, the voting machines have the capacity to display ballots in other languages if they're programmed in. So
Mhm.
like I said, that Los Angeles programs additional 13 languages for voters in Los Angeles that they can go in a polling place and just pop the voting machine on, Chinese and have their Chinese ballot.
Mhm.
But I think that's just another step, but it didn't seem like from the conversations from the last meeting that the poll workers know how to do that here.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Martha, you have a question?
She
Well, I
does.
was just gonna say, just as a comment on the AI. So AI is getting better, but I was working on a survey with the Center for Civic Design. And Whitney Quisenberry, the owner of this amazing little small business, nearly had a conniption when I suggested that we translate it for the first time in AI. She's like, you just can't use, I mean, it's just going to be different. And I honestly not, really being anything, I'm a native English speaker, so I really don't have a sense of what that is like. And most definitely AI will get better,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But I don't know,
Sound like it
that's a worry
necessarily
right
will be.
now. It's still
Yeah.
really limited.
Yeah.
But I would say though that I don't think it seems to me, and I could be wrong, there's not a ton of information out there that's like easily accessible to people on the internet.
Mhm.
But it seems like you would just have to, like, it's just translating the instructions on the ballot. Like they're just translating those instructions. So I have a hard time thinking that it would be like super difficult to translate the instructions in even 50 different languages and just like have this template that can be printed out. I can understand that maybe like the bureaucratic part of printing a ballot out might be might be harder than I think. I don't know how all the absentee ballots are printed out, but I mean, I don't know how hard it is to do, like the printing of a special ballot. I know from my research that this is all like proprietary software.
Right.
It's not like you just go into Microsoft Word and put in a ballot template. You have to use the companies, and I know is not as straightforward as you would think, which is an issue. But I don't really see why it would be that difficult to like print on demand a variety of ballots with different instructions, but I'm wrong there, but yeah, it seems like that technology exists. At least the voting machine manufacturers do advertise that they do allow the ADA voting
Capability.
machines, like the ones that if you needed puffin and the puffin sip type assistance, like you
Mhm.
could program those as well to have a Spanish ballot. So you could have a Spanish ballot and then a disabled, a handicap accessible ballot. And yeah, so I think all of that could be done on ADA voting machines, but because at least in my area, like there's just one of those at every precinct, and it seemed from the last conversation, who knows if they really know how to use those machines and if they're like actually working and accessible for people.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, can be done technologically is an important question as we think about recommendations, because I don't want to just us to take the time, put a recommendation, then hit a hard wall of, oh, we can't do that. So it's I think we're kind of thinking along the same lines of what's possible, and you with more knowledge about it with your research spoke well to that. Thank you. Ted, what was your question?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts as Nadine described that situation. I think maybe the first one is in listening to the folks talk about best practices. One of them was this idea of plain speech, which I had never really paid attention to before, but really does make a lot of sense. Nadine said it seems like it would just be the instructions and kind of the administrivia that needs to be translated. And the more clearly written those instructions are, the easier it is to translate, number one. And then for those of us who are English readers and speakers, it's also easier for us to access and read. So that's, that's sort of one of those overlapping circles that benefits both the ability to translate it as well as the ability to use the English version as well. And I'll second Martha's comment, the complication of using translators, and I see Jennifer put a note in here as well. Profoundly different things come out of the translator box. I've been running the book fair here in town for the school district, and we've been trying to help kids who speak Vietnamese. And I've been walking around with a little pocket translator, and boy, have those kids laughed at me. I mean, it's like a cliche. And it wasn't until I got a native Vietnamese speaker to help me translate some of our written instructions for them were they able to communicate more clearly. And I'll go back to that opening point. The woman who was helping me translate said, "Well, you wrote this too complicated in English. That's why it's so complicated to translate." So again, using that plain speech is a benefit to all voters, not just those that need it translated.
I think we should also mention in whatever report, and people forget, English is not like, there's no requirement that someone has to speak English in order to vote. Like, English is just like the standard of practice, but it's not, we don't have like an official, like, as far as I'm concerned, it's not in our constitution that people have to speak English. And so, making people demonstrate a proficiency in English would be akin to like a knowledge test, or, which is why we have this Voting Rights Act here, is that we can't prohibit people from voting because they, it's like the poll taxes and grandfather clauses and all of that stuff. So that is like a concern that I think people tend to forget about, that speaking English should, or being literate, or any of those things, it is like there's no tests. That is not allowed. That is, I believe that is in our constitution, that there shouldn't be, or I guess would be, I don't know. I'm in the middle of grading and my brain is totally fried, but it's for sure in our Voting Rights Act.
Oh,
that no
gotcha.
test.
I gotcha. Me too.
All right.
But I've also created, and let me change the share of my screen. That might be helpful or just interesting to people, but I know Ted looked at this last month, but I just took data from the census, or the American Community Survey, and mapped where these populations are. So this is limited English speaking population, and to be clear, it's not registered voters. It's just, that's the key that makes these unknowns, is that who's a registered voter is data that's maintained by North Carolina, right? And a lot of these statistics coming from the census are not integrated with North Carolina's voter file, right? So these percentages are just, I believe, the citizen population, but we know that not all citizens are registered to vote. So there are clusters of groups of these individuals.
Does anyone know what that very red county is there? It looks like it's next to Sampson. That means if I'm reading that means a high percentage of speak English less than very well, Nadine?
Yeah. Yeah.
God, I'm glad this isn't 4th grade North Carolina history.
I know, right?
I mean, I could identify my county and maybe like 10 or 12 others, which is just ridiculous.
Is that Duplin? So I pulled up a map.
It might be.
Okay.
The one
But I
below
don't
it's
know
Pender.
anything about Duplin though.
No one, there's a lot of ag workers, or I don't know. I'm not gonna speculate.
Yeah.
That-
No,
that'd be-
there's, I think, like, I want to say there's like chicken farms there.
Yeah. Now I know that's what would apply to Sampson, which is just to the west of it. very heavy
Fayetteville is
ag.
in the vicinity too.
That's right, because Cumberland is next to Sampson. So yeah, we're right
Yeah.
there. So
It's maintained its agricultural heritage and rural environment through the years while allowing a blending with industrial development, economic growth, and of course, an enviable lifestyle.
very nice.
There, these could be like very small populations nonetheless. So,
Yeah.
I can investigate it further, but I just created the most the largest group that we would be interested in are Hispanic or Latinos.
Sure.
So this area here, there's something going on in this region where there's a lot of those who identify as Hispanic or Latino. And I do want to make it a distinction. They're not the same. It's like a Venn diagram has a large intersection, but for example, like Brazilians are not Hispanic, but they are Latinos.
Latino. Right.
Yeah. But there's
I've always been a little shaky on that. I
I-
knew they
this
weren't
is
the
a-
same, so I have
This is
cleared
a-
that
a-
first step.
difficult conversation, and it depends what discipline of people. Like if you ask a sociologist, they'll all say that's all social constructions, and what we think of a certain group is like just the American centric point of view. But I just wanted to make a little asterisk there. My husband is a Latino from Colombia, and I've learned a lot since being married to him. And he has told me specifically the difference there. But and then the disabled voting population, I created this map too. So like Ted said, these are large proportions of the population. Wow.
You know, I wonder if election directors in these counties know. I mean, I'm sure they have a sense of it, but I wonder if they've seen it, so graphically drawn out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nadine, after you responded to my question last month about these charts, I was trying to think about, well, I just made an assumption about what Jennifer just said, which is, well, of course, elections directors, like they got to know this. The state's got to be providing this information. Who am I to type this stuff up and send it out as a recommendation? But I do wonder if what we can do in our recommendations is provide these and say, obviously the state doesn't have resources to provide the same level of capability in every single county. But if we know where, if our recommendation is use demographic data, here's an example of proportions of limited English proficiency speakers in these particular counties to ensure that more materials for translation are available, or more poll workers with, these language skills are recruited in these places, that helps kind of sharpen the point, so to speak.
Yeah, and remember, a lot of these directors are relatively new in their jobs. So I think it would be good to have in the report.
Agree.
I'm curious, and I bet there's some like real reason why this is probably unethical, but hear me out. Is there a way maybe we could have some sort of like more detailed voter registration application that voters could indicate like, hey, I am vision impaired. And so maybe like when you register to vote and you can state your preference that like, I would prefer to have my ballots in Spanish, or I have this type of disability. Granted, it probably wouldn't, people wouldn't necessarily update it whenever something changed, but it would maybe give officials a better idea of the population that they're trying to accommodate if they had that data when people are registering to vote.
We had our election director from the Carter Center in a meeting yesterday who was asked about what information you have to provide to register. And by law, it's not a whole lot, right? You have to be 18 to be a US citizen. I mean, there's certain things that you cannot ask. What gets conflated is in states like ours where there's motor voter registration, and you have to answer more questions for your driver's license. So, if you're vision impaired, hearing impaired, all that gets put, into the same record or done at the same time. And so That's really the way that could happen. But I think in terms of just registering, I think you're very limited by law in asking all
Okay.
these things. It could be, maybe it could be optional. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I suspect there's probably some like big ethical concern about why that I'm just not, it's not in my brain. That probably makes perfect sense, but I would just be like, yeah, it probably would be nice to know, or I'm sure people would like to indicate that information. Like, yeah, if there was some optional, I mean, we can select which political party we want to identify with. So I know there's optional things that, I mean, you can just not say that you have a disability and go on with your life. But if you know that you have like a sizable population of blind voters, then you need to be prepared.
We'll ask the lawyers on our committees.
That's just an idea. I think it is probably an extreme idea. And of course, the benefits would definitely be in the future because, of course, like you would have to build up that information as people register and re-register. But that's just like a nerdy, data collection idea. I'm always thinking about stuff like that. Like, why don't
Jane,
we
two thoughts. One that in the literature that I read, there was a lot of discussion of how adamant voters with disabilities are about kind of representing themselves and enfranchising themselves, and that might be a population who would offer that sort of information. The DMV issue that has come up a couple times in our conversations as kind of the biggest source of voter registration, the population of voters with disabilities disproportionately do not register through the DMV. They register through the DMV at much lower rates than voters without registration. And then finally, maybe rather than gleaning that information at the front end with voter registration, maybe that's a post-election survey sort of opportunity that those voters who are affected would probably participate. Well, I don't know if they would, but I would be hopeful that they would participate in maybe higher rates than just the average voter would.
Well, I mean, we do exit polls, but then that doesn't, I mean, I'm going to teach an exit polling class. I planned on trying to get it all over North Carolina. That's a little too busy, but so I wonder, and I haven't asked about disability status in the past on that. So
yeah, maybe it's more general even than what is your disability. Maybe part of that exit poll is what resources or accommodations would you have liked to have at that polling place, and then that speaks to that speaks to language limitations, disabilities. Who knows?
But there might also be a little selection bias there because some people might not be going to the polls just because they've already just kind of, I don't know. It seems in the literature that a lot of them are just like,
yeah, I agree.
Isolated, and they feel like second class citizens.
Yeah.
They definitely do not. Voters with disabilities participate in mail-in and early voting at much higher rates than
and I would
registered at the same rates.
And I would think you would see a lot of that hesitancy to even go in and vote for people with language who speak a different language too. Is they may know they have every right to go in there and vote, but everyone's going to be speaking English, and just out of just pure, not wanting to be just powerless almost. They might not go in and vote. So because of the language. So everything we're talking about really is about increasing the number of people who vote. So that's a good North Star for us to keep in mind.
I think we should also keep in mind also like the registration for like limited English proficient folks. They're usually immigrants, right? And so they're already less knowledgeable of government systems. And like, I think the website for North Carolina, I mean, I'm not like a ADA or language. I don't have the knowledge on like making sure everything meets the standards. but like knowing that you would have to go to the website, navigate the website, which I think is just pretty much in English, to find the absentee ballot link. It just seems like there's a lot of steps, like even just registering to vote and figuring out what to do. That information is difficult for regular Americans. It's difficult for college kids.
Yeah.
So
And adults
people
as
who
well.
are, you know, for whatever reason, a little bit less knowledgeable of government and might not, I suspect a lot of people who are eligible to vote who don't speak English, a good chunk of them are probably not registered to vote.
Yeah.
Just for, there's a lot of barriers to just being registered. But I've also broken down some relevant disabled populations that you know, like the vision impairment. If we have an optical scan system, right, like an absentee ballot is not going to be helpful for someone who can't see. So there's still considerations that absentee ballots are not a one size fits all solution. Not all vision impaired people can read Braille either. So there are some groups of people, and curbside voting might not also be helpful here. Obviously, if you have a vision impairment, you might not, you're not driving. So there's just more consideration there.
Sure.
Ambulatory impaired, so people who have some sort of
My goodness.
yeah.
That's very
I'm guessing
interesting.
age relate. A lot of these are elderly people.
I tell you, on every metric, Bladen County, which is just south of us, is in the red. So just as a journalist, there's a story there going on with Bladen County because they're almost rallying almost all these metrics. And you know, it's a rural county, but I don't know that why it would be different than some of the other rural counties that's around Cumberland, which is where Fayetteville is. It's interesting. So this is good stuff.
You said?
Huh?
Oh, I'm just looking at it. Oh, okay, there. Okay.
Yeah, Bladen, yeah. Which is okay. Anything else, Nadine?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, good report. Great report. Both Nadine, both you and Ted. Excellent work. Mine's going to be short. Honestly, I think trying to share my screen will take more time than my report. Let's see. Okay, I guess first I have to find it.
So you put it up in the document, right? Do you want me to share the document? Because I have it
Yeah.
open if you want to do that.
Well, let's
Oh,
see.
got it. Never mind.
Do y'all see it?
Yep.
I see like a corner of your screen.
What about now?
Better.
There.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you read it? I mean, is everything visible? Full sentences and whatnot?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least it is
So,
for me.
okay. And now that I've got it up, jump right to the bottom because we're going to start there at the bottom of it. Because I want you to be thinking about, these things as as I very briefly, that's not the document. I'm sorry, y'all. That's not the full. You know what I need, Martha and Rachel? I forgot. I moved everything to our working document.
So let me
Can you share that? Yeah. Okay.
Or if Rachel gets there faster.
Yeah.
Okay, where's share screen?
Sorry, y'all. That was a draft.
Myron, I think you have to unshare first.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that the next person can share.
All right. Oh, stop share. Okay, I just saw it.
Or unshare
Okay.
sounds good too. Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Yes. Unshare actually sounds a little more friendlier than stop sharing.
Can everyone see this all right? Should I make it a little bigger?
Yeah, a little bigger, yeah.
And let me see. I learned how to do this yesterday. There. Is that better? Or do you want it a little bigger?
Yeah,
About
a little bit
150?
bigger and go straight to the bottom, Martha. Because there I have questions for us to think about. So as I briefly go over this, be thinking about this, where in the process specified, can we make it easier for former felons to vote? What are the real life challenges to their voting, not just what the law says on paper, like the actual voters' experience? What advantages or disadvantages might there be to eliminating the necessity of their completing probation and parole to receive their voting rights back? So these are not questions for us to answer here at this meeting, obviously, but I want you to be thinking about. So when we get to the recommendation stage, which I'm hoping we can start working on that next meeting, we can talk about that. That we'll have that kind of grounding. Okay, so Martha, if you could head back to the top. And I think probably everybody here knows this, but in North Carolina, you have to be clear of probation and parole. So merely getting out of prison, getting out of the incarceration stage of state custody is not enough. You got to complete your. Now, what we don't have here, and I mentioned down there, that's better than some states. We don't have the additional requirement of having to pay all your like fines and fees, to my knowledge. Florida has that, and about I think 8 or 9 other states have that. Now, 23 states mentioned, as I mentioned there, and this comes from the National Conference of State Legislatures, as you can read, but 23 states, when you're out of the incarceration phase, you're ready to vote. You have your voting rights back. And personally, that's what I would love to see it move in that direction here. Now, the rest of the info, I am very much not repeating work that someone has already done and better than what I could do. Some Shara Blackburn, she had sent us a document that kind of goes into the nitty gritty of the restoration process. I'm not going to go point by point. If you could go a little bit further down, Martha, I want to highlight something that Shara said toward the end of that report.
Down at the very
Right
bottom.
there. Not the
Oh.
right there.
There.
Yeah. So she points out the State Board of Elections. They have actually a little bit further down. Martha, if you can.
Oh, sorry. I was looking for the Meredith poll stuff to
Gotcha.
help you with there.
Yeah. So the State
More
Board
of
of
this.
Elections governs it, and there's a process. So if y'all could have a look at this document on your own time, just look at the various stages of the process and bear in mind that the questions I had toward the end. Again, the one that obviously stood out to me is an area I would like to see improved, is make it so there's less hoops to jump through, so to speak, less items to do to get their voting rights back. I don't really see, and this is why I want us to think about what would be the setback. I mean, let's say there were no politics involved. Okay, let's say there were no politics involved. What would be the downside of allowing people who've committed felonies to have their voting rights restored when they in the incarceration stage, when they're out? And because there may be some downsides that I'm not seeing. So these are the questions I would like for us to think about. What questions do you have or what you see so far? Or suggestions?
Myron, maybe just I guess the
You know what?
cross-referencing required about as someone who completes that. Do they help me understand? Do they apply for voter registration again?
Yeah.
Is it like starting from scratch for an individual?
Go back up, Martha, a little bit on what Shara was saying there. It feels like that to me, Ted. It feels like
You're standing, but
yeah,
they have to do another application. and
yeah,
they have to-
it sounds like there's another layer, and that to me is kind of the opposite of where we should be going, because
Yeah.
already the registration process, as you know, Nadine and others have pointed out, there's enough steps, and it sounds like
right.
they have an additional step. And you got to remember, these are folks coming out who have been cut off from most of how society operates for X amount of time. So if anything, they need the process to be easier, not so complicated. So that might be one area that we certainly could look at, reducing the paperwork, making a much easier process. If we stick with the system, you got to be clear, probation, parole, and all of those things. Great
I've
question.
never considered this, Myron, but I suppose, for instance, when I moved into the state and I applied for registration,
Mhm.
was my I guess driver's license information run against a database
Mhm.
to obviate me from being on a felon voter list?
Good question. That's something I can look into.
Honestly, it's not clear. There is a fairly good data in North Carolina about who's a felon, but I've never talked to
That
any election officials about. And I know there's not a centralized list that says, Martha Croft is done with her sentence and
Right.
she finished parole. And maybe that's a suggestion that's actually one of my students made, was that we have a list of some sort. So anyway, my hand wasn't up, and Nadine's, but I was trying to answer the question. So
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good question. Something to discuss.
I have a potential reason
Okay.
that might get to like the administrative work aspect.
Mhm.
Like parole is like a conditional thing, and I know there's like different types of release.
Right.
And I think like maybe because we're removed from these situations, but I don't think that everyone makes it through their parole. Like
That's correct.
they can get reincarcerated. And so I feel like that is probably like the thing that the
So
I
the
yeah, it's like you're
justification
not
for
done.
mhm.
You're not done. Like you're on parole, which means if you violate your parole, they put you right back
Mhm.
into the jail or
Right,
the
right.
center.
That's typically how it
Um,
works, yeah.
and I feel like keeping track of all of that might be burdensome too. And I don't know like the rate that people fail parole, but my guess is especially with drug offenses
Mhm.
that people tend to fail parole a lot more than we probably would think.
It's a figure to look up, I mean, to inform our discussion here.
But to
Thank
be
you for
clear, I'm kind
yeah.
of like I think people who are incarcerated should vote in general. So
Yeah.
that isn't I mean, but I can see why if you have to go check these voter registrations for people who are in and out of like I know I during COVID I watched a lot of just like court streaming things, and I
Mhm,
saw
mhm.
there's a lot of weird situations and more complicated release situations. It's not just you go to jail and you come out of jail. It's like people are bouncing around. Like they might be incarcerated and then they come out on parole and then they fail their parole and then they go back into incarceration. And then, I guess there's also different types of release. So
Yeah.
I think maybe as nasty as it sounds in my mind, like it would be easier for the government to keep track if everyone just were like hands clean of like possibly going back into prison.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I have, there certainly could be aspects I'm missing, and that could be one. So let me get some help here from Rachel, Martha, and whoever else wants to pitch in. Um, is it in line with a workable timeline to next meeting start working on these recommendations? Is that
Joel, could you remind us of what our timeline needs to look like?
So we're hoping to have like the draft findings delivered to the steering committee by June 30th. And then of course our next in-person meeting is going to be July 15th.
So we could have another meeting.
we're gonna have to
Hey,
have another meeting?
while we're here,
Yeah.
so well, not while we're here, but
'Cause-
just in
'cause
general,
without-
I want to share one more thing really fast
Sure.
because I ran and this is what I want to click on. I ran to to the Meredith poll. I mostly noticed this the last time that we should maybe put some of this stuff in that. Part of the problem is not just that people, that maybe the process is clunky. And it's not that local, that felons they do get information when they come out, but with a big old packet of here's what's going to be happening to
Right,
you.
right.
So Mark Meredith at University of Pennsylvania actually had a study where he showed that voter turnout wasn't actually greater after they did, this educational effort. Because I guess they just didn't see it. But furthermore, a lot of people simply don't know, just general citizens, as indicated by the Meredith poll, that
Mhm.
felons can vote.
Yeah.
So one wonders, if your brother comes out of jail and he wants to, he's like, and not a lot, I mean, from my understanding, it's not like they're jumping, let me vote.
Right.
But if you want to vote, you want to go register, and you need to go register, no, don't do it. Because you've already been in it, you've already had enough problems, right?
Mhm.
And you don't want to get arrested for voter fraud. Don't do
Yeah.
it. Don't. You could see someone discouraging their family
Certainly,
member if they
certainly.
didn't know.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of letting, education too. And
Mhm.
I don't know how to make it better than what they're already doing.
Okay.
I have
So
a
I'm just throwing that out
follow-up.
and we can talk about it more.
Sure.
I have
Sure.
a little follow-up on that, is that also these places are geographically like places where you're going to find a lot of felons. Like felon disenfranchisement affects that whole community. So there's probably more to it than just like the misinformation might be like
Mhm.
pervasive in certain communities more than others. So
Oh.
if you have a community with a lot of like if your father, I saw a paper at Midwest like ages ago, but the finding was like if someone in your family can't vote, you're not
Mhm.
instilling those practices into the children. So you have generations that are sort of,
Yeah. Haven't
I guess,
prioritized voting. Yeah.
yeah. And
We
then
should
this
put that down as a
information.
problem too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cause that's great. That's a
Mhm.
great point, Nadine. I've heard
Uh,
that too. And,
Okay.
my student was working on some stuff on that too, so.
Mhm.
I can add anecdotally, I lived in Lompoc, California for several times. It's a huge federal penitentiary there, and I didn't understand it at the time, but every time I would go in and out of the library, the grocery store, the gas station, there were like information tables set up, people handing out pamphlets. And it did not click for me, but a commander explained that that was for the benefit of the family members who were living in the community to help them understand what the rights of their incarcerated family member was. So Nadine, your point about them being geographically separated populations, yeah, I hate to keep making recommendations along the lines of you know public service announcements and educating the public, but those I think that we're all agreeing that the individual might not be the most important person to educate here, but maybe the people around that
People around.
individual.
Yeah.
Especially for somebody who's coming back into society with that huge stack of, education literature and also, the weight of the world back on their shoulders as they incorporate into society. But if they've got uncles and aunties or neighbors or
Yeah.
other people in that community that can help them understand
Oh,
better.
that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ted, I think we knew early on that better information would be a part of whatever we came up with with recommendations. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and think about when we need to meet next. And
Do we
the
have a
other
set time?
We do. So the next scheduled meeting is June 5th. Do we want to keep that?
June 5th.
Oh,
and
this is our May meeting. Holy moly.
yeah.
Sorry, June 5th. Let me look at my calendar.
And when do we have to turn in our recommendations, Rachel?
June 30th.
Okay. I think that would work, but I think in the meantime, those of us who worked on our specific areas, Nadine in language, Ted in disability, me with felon voting, Sam with just
Here.
being a great guy.
How old are you, kiddo?
Come here.
me?
Yeah.
How old are you? No, I wasn't talking to your dad. I don't care how old he
I'm
is.
not gonna tell you.
11.
Yeah.
Cool.
He's 53.
Yeah, I'm 53. Oh, okay, yeah. But okay, so and then in the meantime, I think those of us who headed up these different research efforts should pose to the group. Rachel, maybe it could be one document. Be thinking of these in terms of just tell the whole committee, be thinking of these questions and what recommendations you might make. And then when we come to the June meeting, we're
Mhm.
ready to talk about recommendations. And it'll be a working meeting, as they say. Not that they all aren't. So does that sound like a plan to everybody?
Yeah, so that would mean that I'm gonna look around for some more college student access information.
Okay. Okay.
Because maybe I can pull something together, but
Yeah.
just so you know, I'll try and pull together something to report back on that.
Okay. All right. And I don't know if y'all have my cell phone. I know you do, Ted. But yeah, you can make that one of the first way to reach out to me, honestly. If there's something that needs to have my attention, because I'm very mobile phone oriented. So okay. Anything else for the good of the group before we vamoose break? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. I always learn something when I'm a part of these meetings. And so, and keep up and thank you for all the reports.
too.
Great work, everybody. Okay. Y'all have a good evening.
See ya.
Have a good
Bye.
night. Bye.